friendly greetings. I am Torley, and I'm delighted to see you. Haha. I am out of the shower, feeling fresh, and before I pay my bills, I'm going to let responsibility just slide to the side and share my new music with you. I'm so, well, you can tell I'm excited. I could read it like this. I'm so excited. See, body language counts for a lot. So, Sample Phonics is hosting a Design a Genre competition / contest. I reckon, this is a wonderful, wonderful, delightfully glorious opportunity to bring back some of the treasures I have discovered in other Sonic parallel universes, 17 of them in fact, and submit that as an album. Now, an intriguing limitation, MacGyver style, is that each piece must be shorter than 2 minutes in length. So I'm going to share a little bit about the candid behind the scene-ish stories if you're into that kind of thing, because I sure am. Let's roll onward. Enjoy. So, genre, as defined by Wikipedia, of course, has been a thorny thing for me because a lot of the times labeling constraints rather than is an accessible sort of guidepost. Another way to say it, the map is not the destination, shows you where to go. With Casinoclash, it can be difficult to tell where to go. When you're put in a Las Vegas or other casino, they take the clocks away. They illuminate it with fancy neon lights. And I love that environment, not the noise so much, but the color and the spectacle. I stay away from the machines and games of chance because I have a compulsion to gamble, so that's not healthy. But if I can channel into making music, that is a wondrous, I use that word too much nowadays, thing indeed. So at Casinoclash, I imagine sort of the effusive indulgence. I was drawn to the elements of materialism, I suppose, in some hip-hop and urban trap and other contemporary music, where it's a lot about glory for material riches. And the hilarious thing to me, of course, is here you have casinos in some ways, like these modern idols, these temples you go into to worship the almighty dollar. And so I thought as I was going along with it, I was listening to some of the aforementioned music, nodding my head along on the freeway with my wife vaping and and our little mini low rider. And I thought to myself, well, this would be a lot of fun. Take all the casino noises I can think of, from cards, that is the sound of dealers shuffling decks, to craps and dice being thrown, to complimentary drinks being handed out. You get liquored and you're going to play a few more hands there. And it was just a really head nodding thing. And sort of my motif with using reverberation is kind of like you're stuck in this eternal ship. These fortifications, it's like a modern arcology. You can go from one casino to another in Las Vegas without going outside into the heat, and you can go and keep playing and playing, and it stretches for miles and miles. And it would be an amazing starship in a Douglas Adams sense as well. Just really, really a sort of cheeky satire of humanity, but recognizing some of those darker elements. And speaking of that, a late influence was watching Breaking Bad. I have only watched in full the last and the very first episode, so I don't know if I'll continue to make that a tradition, but that's how I roll with Casinoclash. Wow, I can really roll with the stories as well. That was about 3 minutes. So the next entry is Cloud Crunk. And of course, this is another fun take on urban music. I like some of the vibe, the very minimalist driving bass elements of crunk and of related crumping, the sort of healthy therapy of channeling your bodily energy. And in this case, the physicality at which I exerted, bang, 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 hitting notes on the keyboard, sometimes at random, and then quantizing it later so it makes a serviceable rhythm. It's pretty funny. And I'm not introducing these pieces in the order I composed them. It's how the album was sequenced. I thought this order makes sense because Casinoclash, we could have Casino Crunk as well. How's that for mashing up a mashup of genres? The Casinoclash was very materialistic. So with Cloud Crunk, we have something more akin to spiritualism. And of course, that can be interpreted a number of ways. I was inspired watching some sermons by Joel and Victoria Austin. My inspirations, they come all over the place, all over the globe. And he was talking about prosperity. And I think when people define that, that's a very controversial thing as well, because prosperity is that money to you. And if money can buy happiness, in a sense, will it pay for an experience like a vacation? Because in that way, money did channel, it was a proxy to that happiness and experience of vacation you shared with family, with friends. And with Cloud Crunk, I was thinking, of course, instead of low riders, so thinking of high riders. I love flying cars. So I have this dun, 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 this flying car vibe, not just a DeLorean, but I love those when I used to watch Care Bears. And I hope they revive that like My Little Pony, but I used to love those little cloudmobiles. I forget what they call them, but just, it frustrates me too how rainbows are so bright, but if we could someday be augmented into transhumans and see far beyond that spectrum, what else is out there? People think they could scan for ghosts and they could scan for angels and demons. And so that was all part of my, my thinking. And I'm just reading my descriptions over to see what I haven't covered. But I love just these nuggets, these little blurbs that hint at the references. I'm such a trivia buff, not just movies, not just TV tropes, but all sorts of things like that. And so I included the distorted harps. I love the sound of something so clean and pure like a harp being distorted through cassette grime and through guitar amps and off-kilter sorts of beats. And that's how Cloud Crunk was born. I suppose a practical note in thinking about genres and defining and creating them is, of course, always to have fun. Because I think that if you are looking at music journalism too seriously and you were looking at scenes and snobbery with such trepidation and fear, that removes you from the actual enjoyment of the music. It's like sometimes I'd rather actually, when a review is very well written, I like reading that more than listening to the music. It really puffs something up. Then I hear the music. It's like, well, that doesn't sound that different. But part of that was because perhaps the review was not necessarily serious, but it had this sort of lack of levity towards the subject. So it's sort of a weird contradiction in my mind. And so with something like Taikotronic, thank you graciously to my awesome little brother, little in age, not in heart. I will tell you that he makes a lot of sacrifices for my crazy. His Zephos. Zephos is his artist name. Brother Zephos is what I would call him, like a monk. And he brainstormed a lot of these genres with me, a lot of the seeds, even though I didn't end up using the final names. And so he was talking because he has a strong reference and experience with Japanese anime, with manga. He draws it very well. And he was telling me about, I called something, created something Taikotronic, and I began to think about films like Paprika. Yeah. I love the music in that. I was thinking about how in other parts of the world, they can make something so catchy, and we may even a familiar well, not necessarily familiar in the, hey, I already know this, but I've heard this somewhere long ago, but it's sort of foggy sense. Maybe there's a primordial sense of a melody in humans. But anyway, but they can make it in such an unusual sort of way. It can be packaged very differently. The instruments can be very different. And so at Taikotronic, some of the beats, they are very complex in a polyrhythmic sense, and they're offset by more simple elements. I love blending the organic, the synthetic, and having these sorts of contrasts. And so I was thinking this sort of cyberpunk parade, that's another common element I love, that era, the 2040s to, well, 100 years from now, I suppose. And I was thinking all about that bridging, respecting your elders. I often think to the founders of electronic music. There are more names than I can name here, but one name that's, of course, keeps coming up in my life is Dr. Bob Moog, and the synthesists that prospered from his inventions, like Wendy Carlos, for instance. And although this sounds nothing like Wendy Carlos, in creating it, I did think about her sense of inventiveness. I did think about her sense of placing timbres and tones in their own very discrete spaces at times and arranging the whole symphony, even though this is not a symphonic work in its strictest sense. See, it's an interesting thing when you start to really get into genres, the words smash up against each other, the linguistics, the limitations of them really fall short. I have a lot of fun with that, but it's a lot of frustration too. And so you have the sounds too, which are influenced by, I suppose, the glitch hop, Neuro, what is it? Neuro hop, Neuro funk, all these. You got to have fun with it. That's all. And in the process, I was doing, oh, one moment, water drink. Gotta stay hydrated, like Garris says. Drink a lot of water. It's good for you. I was listening, I was looking, and I was learning so many research pages, so many tabs, shuffle them like a deck of cards in my web browser. And I was reading about the German label Compact. And they have some really cool genre innovations and compilations, like ambient pop is one, and another one is this made me laugh, Schlafo, because it sounds like a kind of food, doesn't it? I'm probably thinking of a shawarma or something, but I thought, okay, I hear a lot of this Schlafo, and I like the rhythm. I'm probably saying that horribly, Schlafo. What a funny word, eh? It's got a weird mouthfeel. And I thought about how modern dance music has a lack of pentatonic scales. Now, besides that technical term, pentatonic, you think of that as Chinese, a lot of Chinese music. And so that's where that all came together. And the names for these pieces in most cases came towards the end. So Hungry for Power was, of course, if you look at that joke about if you ate at a German Chinese restaurant, you'd be hungry for power an hour later. I'm butchering that, but that was the impetus. But it's a fun kind of song. And I love the use of the pitch bend to swoop things. I wish polyphonic pitch bend, independent and more than one played note at a time, was a lot more common. So I do a lot of this. I just love the glide, and you'll hear that in a lot of these pieces. It's sort of a signature of mine that permeates no matter what genre I'm doing. There's always, often enough, a fluidity. So some of you are so encouraging to me, asking, when are you going to do more videos showing more synthesizer performance? And in fact, it is my anger. It's hard to imagine. It's my rage that I am in this really, I don't know if it's limbo. It's a tough state where I play conventional keyboard controllers and I'm very well used to them. That's my roots. But I am angry that there aren't more alternative, widespread, mass manufactured controllers out there that allow for expression beyond this, like what I was just saying in the last track about having polyphonic pitch bend or other sorts of things. And I see innovations coming to the market, like touch keys, like the Raleigh Seaboard, of course, like the Haken Continuum. And that's been on the market over a decade, I think, in limited editions, of course. Those things are priced out of most people's reach. And while they're great for the virtuoso, I'd love to see more intro for children. I think it's very, very important to serve children. I think it's great iPads. Children, because they are so wonderful and so versatile, music is a peripheral sort of side benefit. Well, of course, it's a big market too. But it's great children have that accessibility, and other people who you have afforded enough in a first world country perhaps to buy an iPad, but after that a lot of the apps are free or very cheap. And of course that has another whole economic, if you've read the latest Jaron Lanier, you know what I'm getting about here, that unfortunate as it is, if someone like Apple undercuts the rest of the market, makes it difficult for smaller players. I won't get into that there, but what I'm driving with this, I've been talking without talking about the next track, Watermelon Salad. And if you get that reference, bonus points to you. So Watermelon Salad, and what a mouthful. Progressive, military, industrial, there's another joke, acid metal trap. And it has all elements of all those, of course, blended into one very abrasive stew. And it's a very angry sort of piece. It's my Hulk sort of thing, because I'm thinking well, progressive rock, it's great you virtuosos have all these flourishes, and it mirrors in some way the sort of seething pretentiousness that these critics, they perceive, in some cases wrongly, about that. It's like, oh, you're doing a bunch of wankery playing these fast runs. I admire players like Jordan Rudess. I love what he does. I don't do that. I play at my own kind of pace. I'm driving Miss Daisy, but I love those runs, and I love the speed. I love the ferocity. I love the technique and the dynamicism and a lot of the changes. It's like, well, we use that chord progression. We're not going back to it in that 17-minute song. But anyway, this was 2 minutes, and I thought about the early experiments read in an interview with Charlie Clouser. Very, very articulate. I love his posts on Gearslutz. Great stuff. And thanks, Charlie, if you ever see this, for your Omnisphere tips. That was wonderful. And so I was thinking about those kind of early industrial pieces, and by some German bands whose names I will butcher. Need to hear them. I can't just read them. And I was thinking about the organ. That's why I have those organ solos in here. They swoop, they glide, and at one part there's almost a sort of East Indian Yanni meets Spango sort of synthesis melody. It's like a floating sort of flute towards the end, and I thought, well, this is a great time to bring in more structure with an acid line. So one of the best things I ever read in a music interview was when Trent Reznor, he talked about combining both hard quantized, presumably something like a drum machine, and the unquantized elements together, and it can create quite a groove. He didn't say that groove part, but I could never find the exact source. If anyone knows, let me know. I'd love to find that exact quote, because that's been a big part of my music ever since. So, and sometimes in here, the drums, they're actually locked, and then they get really sloppy, but you have the synthesis parts that are dun 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 dun, pulse, 16th note with some echo. That's how it is. But then you have the organ that's dissonant and it's swooping everywhere, and it just speaks to me of that joy that can come out of my anger, that I'm angry that I can't do more on these controllers, but I'm grateful to have them as a means of expression. And as I reach towards something, I don't know if it's higher, if it's diagonal in a subspace containment field, but that's how very much I feel. And the love I feel then that results from people who would normally be combative of these different genres getting together. And I think music is such a powerful unifier that way, when you can look past scenes and labels and you listen to it and you like what you like, and you get together with people and you can talk about your love for that, and you get closer as people. You share other interests. You may become close friends. You may become lovers. You can have a wonderful story together. For now, as I continue to explore and discover track further, I think it's a safe assumption / presumption that I'm not too inclined to do performance videos per se, unless I feel there's something I can really share with you that would be useful and fun to you. Otherwise, I think I'm phoning it in. It's not good. So, Marimbar None. That's a I love cracking myself up. All the moods I go through, it's just it's a bouncy castle full of lead sometimes. And the seed of this track came through listening to some wonderful iPhone remixes of course, the marimba ringtone, which if you listen to the track and you thought that before me saying it, hey, you're spot on. That's precisely what I was striving to emulate in not necessarily in the whole melody, but a sort of the vibe. And it's so fascinating to me how ringtones, and these sonic signatures, and whether they're used in a smartphone or a electric car that has its own crafted synthetic engine noise, so it's not too quiet, so people don't run over other people. Good thing in my book. It's just such a part of our aural landscape. And with this one here, I thought specifically myself, the genre is going to be tele 3-step. Tele because of telecommunications and that influence. And 3-step because there are 3 kicks to a bar. Not unlike Picard insisting there are only 4 lights to his Cardassian torturer. That was a horrible, horrible thing to go through. I watched that a few weeks ago again. And it was just the sort of melody that propelled it, and later on shifting into the minor, not necessarily sad, but a lot of dance tracks, they are in minor key. So I thought we're going to have some fun with this. We're going to have it so like start, stop. And I have a lot of oblique influences, things that you don't necessarily hear, but it's felt. It kind of goes through me that way. And in this case, it would be Scott Joplin performing Stop Time Rags. You know, with that kind of rhythm. And I think that's really, really innovative. So in this section, I thought, well, not only we're going to have some fun with a sort of minimal structure, we're going to take out something older, the sort of string orchestra gramophone looping. That was something that I was inspired by the film Triangle, if you ever see that. I'm not going to spoil it. It's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. One of my favorites. And actually, I used the samples that were in part created by one of the composers of Triangle, Christian Henson, I believe it is. And so I put them into the orchestra there. It's like, I like being clever without having to over-explain it in the music, but behind the scenes I can share the story, and that's a lovely thing. Ego Ethno is almost like, if you remember Will-O-the-Wisp, there was that character Evil Edna, and well, there's a humor in this, even a sort of, I wouldn't say it's grim, but again, it's sort of a meta humor poking fun at genre names. And so River Trance, of course, making fun of River Dance. There are Celtic elements in here, aka global tech waltz wave. As I did this in 3/4 time, at parts of it doesn't sound like it, doesn't feel like it, because there are elements that are in 4/4 time. So again, you have polyrhythms layered. And I'm not looking for the hardest thing to do, although, hey, sometimes that's a challenge, but I'm always looking for, this might fit, and it's cool when you have the common denominator 3 and 4 of 12, and you have things every 12 bars, sometimes very subtle. And so I really liked when in the end here, or in the beginning, I thought about, it was actually in the middle, I played this riff. It was out of, I think, the N6 Tyrell by Yuhi. And I thought, these sounds by Unshushable Cocteau, you gotta look them up, fantastic, fantastic band. They sounded so 80s, and I put them through speakerphone, one of my favorite plugins, although I'm not that good about talking about its mechanics. I hug that plugin. I've hugged it dearly for years now. And I thought, this would be a funny beginning too. So I have that 80s sort of riff. I have at the end, just thinking about, this would be cool to have some of these pipes and to think about a pub, vaguely Gaelic. I don't like to get specific ethnic origins wrong. So hey, my storytelling explanation is things develop differently in a parallel universe. And as long as we can stomp to it and come together across cultures, that's another theme I love revisiting. Within this one, Mortgage Payments is the name of a foreclosed house genre track. Of course, in one way, it's humorous, talking about house music, foreclosed house, get it? But it's also a commentary on, unfortunately, the degradation within the American economy and the very, very real problems that presents. And especially if it hits you personally, it's very depressing. I was thinking about how it's unfortunate how some people have, and I hate to generalize, but some people, they are pressured to live beyond their means by neighbors, keeping up with the so-called Joneses. And in doing so, they drive themselves into ruin. And I also think about when you lose sight of what you really love. Like in that show, Breaking Bad, how it started out, of course, Walt is going to be a man, be a provider for his family, and help pay off his cancer bills. And again, that show itself is an intriguing commentary on the healthcare system in some ways. I know that's not the totality of it, but then I think about people that are pressured into making poor financial decisions because it might be uncool to seem frugal. And so that's why I applaud when I hear pop music or a popular very song like Thrift Shop. I think, well, that's great. That kind of message needs to be out there predominantly. I don't mind so much if some unhealthy messages are out there, as long as we have many healthy ones right up there alongside with them. Otherwise, it's very skewed and distorted and difficult to make choices in your own buffet of life. So within this one, I was thinking about Burial, and I love the atmospheres he places in his tracks, along with his enigmaticism. And I was thinking about the sort of, he portrays some aspects. Some people have interpreted as working class London at night. And I think about working class America at night. And in some places, Detroit, and of course, Detroit techno, there's lineage, there's roots there, there's house music connections there, techno. Just like my shirt says, let me stand up a little. If you can see this, it says, I love techno. And I do love techno. Kraftwerk's in the back. Let me show you Kraftwerk as well. Hey, let me just take this off. Kraftwerk, the godfathers, if you can see this, of techno. Stand up. Can't see myself in the cam. Have to show you pictures later. It's getting hot anyway. Better hydrate. But I think back to my roots there, and I think back to my roots of what my dad taught me. You pay your credit cards off in full or don't use them. And that goes for a lot of debts, not just financial, but moral ones you owe to friends. My dad, before he died in 2003, he lamented how it was difficult to trust some people from the younger generation, that in the old days, see, I sound like an old fogey now, make a handshake deal with some things, but people renege on their word. People, they don't follow up. And that disgusts me. It's just disgusting and horrible. And that sort of greed and pulling people in with these Ponzi and pyramid schemes has led to a lot of people, their lives ruined because of lack of balance with something purely man-made, money. Something else that makes me antsy is I love having a preconception about a lot of kinds of music or other non-literary art that I read about. It sounds so fascinating, like I've mentioned earlier, or yeah, it looks so fascinating when I read about it. When I actually see or hear it, then I was like, oh, that's kind of a letdown. It's kind of, I guess, like a menu that is so sumptuously prepared, but when you actually get the food, you're like, wish I hadn't ordered that. And so I do wish more menus at restaurants had samplers. I know this is not feasible, but at least pictures, sometimes they do help draw an additional sense into the dimensions of things, your whole sensory experience as a human being. So this one, Cousteau's Calliope, this was inspired by me reading about sea punk, and it made me laugh. I laughed so hard because I love those old 90s computer graphics. I love the awkward dancing and animated GIF revitalization. But of course, when I listen to a lot of it, it's like, okay, you had a great idea. Why do you have to keep looping this? When's it gonna change? And it's so too repetitive in some ways, and in other ways, I felt that if you laugh too much at something, then you're not going to be able to just enjoy it. There's something my wife says to me that she wants to listen to my music. She doesn't want me talking over it constantly like this. So I think to myself, there is a time and a place and a space for that. That space is right here, right now. That's why I'm not talking over the samples of my tracks. And we'll see how that approach goes. I keep varying it. But anyway, Cousteau's Calliope, this was in some way thinking of the sea punk ethos, thinking of the simple sorts of beats, but taken underwater, a lot of watery samples, dolphin noises, and thinking of course, instead of underground music, we have undersea music. What would music be like differently for a different species? And so this plays into my inspiration from Ted Chiang, where he talks about, for example, heptapods. You got to look that up. I haven't actually read that story. I've read the capsule description, and I hope this is not ironic that the actual story will end up being as promising as the synopsis. Deckard's Decks is, of course, a Blade Runner reference. And wow, how Philip K. Dick's popularity has grown. He is my favorite author, has been for some time. I mean, there's others that jostle at the top, like Harlan Ellison, Ray Bradbury, perhaps Ted Chiang as of late. But in this track, I thought about, well, if we were to marry some of those traditions from the early noir, kind of the cliches, Raymond Chandler sort of stuff, and push that into the 80s and push that into the 90s, where of course in late 90s, mid to late 90s, we have the emergence of some forms of drum and bass, including tech step. And tech step was actually one of the subgenres of drum and bass I was exposed to first. And thank you to Ishkur's Guide. I hope he does a version 3 eventually that exposed me to that, hearing those examples. And with the industrial noises. So I have my own take on that at the end. I'm not going to spoil that. But long story short, I thought about, again, bridging these sorts of cultures, this melting pot, if you were to as I visited Portland recently with food carts. You have all these cultures, pan-fusion cuisine, and it's if you put aside what it means to separate those things, you can let them unify.
There's always balance. That's all I know. Those two birds.
Oh, just do more.
Well, like what then?
More the same birds.
Oh. That's how the owl hoots. It's no variation. That's what he does.
I find a pressure in innovation that a lot of people can relate to is thinking in your own head, self-imposing that you have to create something totally new and that will paralyze you, give you writer's block. It has done that to me from making something at all. And it's often just a tweak to the name and some clever marketing of that name. A name it's difficult, just like it's difficult to identify space someone without a name. That's sort of the limitation of our linguistic systems. No matter what language you speak, we haven't yet evolved to a post-symbolic communication. Imagine if we were able to, like an octopus, more morph into the shapes that we want to share about and things that are possible in a virtual reality space, such as Second Life, cyberspace, where we can transform, we can make things instantaneously appear all Tron-like in front of us to communicate. That, I think, is a lot richer. And I think this is great when we have our augmented technologies, that we go beyond our mortal flesh bodies to become, in some ways, the AIs that we've dreamed about. We have extensions of our bodies. And so with Tropical Owls, this works on a number of levels. The way I sequence tracks, because if you remember Blade Runner, think about owls and what that means. Yes, there's symbolicism. And at first I thought, okay, this is going to be tiki punk. And tiki punk for me, I've defined it in the text description, very much means to me my obsession with, one moment, let me show you. So this is one of many, but my wife gets me treasures like this. And I prize them. I have a whole bunch on the wall there. And it's just so wicked that in some cases I don't know who carved them. And they're mass produced, but I like knowing their different faces, the kind of stories. And I like that primalism. I like the notion, I'll put you back, dude. I love grooving on the fact that when you are going to interfere with a primitive culture, not to use that in a derogatory way, but a culture that's less technologically advanced, that it's going to disrupt them in all sorts of ways. Cargo cults, you give them a Coke if they've never seen one before. If you give them a computer, they've never seen that before. You give them guns. And so tiki punk is at the heart of that. For me, tiki punk is about when you have the even barbaric racism of a cartoonish thinking, ooga chaka. But what if, that's at the heart of a lot of speculative science fiction. What if this happened? What if their culture was so disrupted by giving them synthesizers and drum machines that they end up making this? That's really what it is. And so midway, I was thinking, okay, Exotica music is a big part of tiki culture. Exotica, Martin Denny, with playing in lounges and marimbas, and bird call is a big part of it. And sometimes when they couldn't round up actual birds, they have human impersonators. So I went up to my wife. That's who you hear in the track with me. And I said, can you do some bird calls? The first thing she thought of was an owl. And so the owls became the central part of the track. And I thought about just like the parallel we can draw between you put some sort of technological artifact into a society in which it does not belong. What about if we put a certain bird where it does not conventionally belong? And I've done a little bit of reading on if there are actually tropical owls, but I like to think migration habits. And if, just like humans, we could become acclimated and evolve to climates in which we previously couldn't survive and withstand or even prosper in, what if more animals did that and we had more mass migrations? You'd have disruptions in that as well. You had parasites, displacement of, for example, something, a predator killing off, causing an imbalance, a new predator introduced to the food chain. So it's very much about that sort of question of existence. And I know that's a heavy thing, but hey, if you don't care about that, just right? And one more bit of trivia is if you've listened to my track Tiki Punk, which was blessed to win the Impact Soundworks Juggernaut contest. That was the first Tiki Punk track I did. There is a reference in here, the riff I've sampled myself. And I love having fun with that. And I use Juggernaut to make a lot of these sounds. And Juggernaut itself, think about stone idols, think about the Easter Island, those titans, those are juggernauts as well. So I like having those parallels run on a number of lines. So here we are at number 12, more geekery in Baliset Blues. Baliset, of course, a reference to the Dune instrument, which was in reality a modified Chapman stick, which in this case I performed out of Spectrasonics Trillion. And I love something I do. I don't have a neat name for this, unlike some genres. And this is why I call this through composed Dune House, is because it doesn't repeat it all. It was an improvisation that in parts I did step time and write it out. In parts I played live. Well, most of it I played live. And Dune House, of course, the imperial houses of Dune, although it's not, four on the floor, house music, you know. And so I need a better way to describe where I love to take an instrument that it's non-piano even and have all the different articulations, gliding and plucking, hammering on, swooping up and down the pitches, harmonics, the overtones. And that's what I wanted to explore. And I think that as a dignified note, if more people composed in this genre, we could continue to explore those outer limits of what a Baliset or Chapman stick in reality would be able to do. And I think that would be kind of one-upmanship, that it wouldn't necessarily be virtuosos that outpace each other in terms of playing velocity and technique, but it would be modding your instrument, perhaps. Who could create the craziest Baliset mod, like a PC case mod? Who would really trick it out and show up at Gurney Halleck's house and be the new Kwisatz Haderach of rock and roll over there? And they're Jan Hammer. Sometimes I frustrate myself because I think, well, yeah, there is joy in being succinct, being short, but so much of this, there's a story for each piece, and I just feel so repressed and incomplete without sharing it. And sharing with you, I'm glad I get to record this as a matter of record. Maybe you have thoughts you can relate to. Maybe you can share some of your thoughts. Because a lot of the time I find there are people, artistic, creative types. I think that's just about all of us, in fact, but you're not necessarily thinking that so about someone else if they're always repressing their thoughts. So if you spill some more out and aren't so self-conscious, aren't so afraid of what someone else will think, maybe there's more idea interchange. Maybe there's more art in the world. And I think that when you're thinking of genres, just like you don't want to be self-imposing limitations that will cripple you, as opposed to self-imposed limitations that will help you to be more creative, you don't want to do that to thinking, oh, am I a creative person or not? Sometimes you look past the words, you look past the linguistics. And so speaking of that, because I find ways to tie things in, with appropriate response to reality, this was squarely inspired by the hard life that Philip K. Dick lived. He did not live to see the many, many Hollywood and other successes that his works questioning reality, questioning the government, very, very relevant to today's themes, would really come to fruition. And so I call this genre potboiler. And it's about not so much the instruments or even how it sounds, but the approach that is used. In this case, I played it fast and through. I played it with an acoustic refractions typewriter, tonal typewriter sound for the most part, combined with some samples from Video Copilot. And on the scale of production, you think of VFX artists and how difficult it is when their industry is undercut by lower prices, where they have to produce higher quality work in rushed time. You have all these stresses that come out. And so it is for an artist that is, you're compromising yourself in some ways to cut that quality, but you want to get your paycheck, and you feel horrible on some level because they think, what about my integrity? And it pollutes it in a way that is both disturbing yet comforting, because hey, if you push it out, you can get your paycheck. But what does that say to your soul? What does it do to you as an artist? And so that all ties back, if you recall, Philip K.'s Dick life. If you think about how he had to, in some cases, people thought that his prose, now I haven't had a problem with it, but they thought his lack of characterization and his flourishes in other areas had to do with him being paid by the word and churning this stuff out quickly, and how he so often revisited the same sorts of core themes and ideas. And so in this piece, I divided it. There's different typewriter tones that are used, just like in a way it's revisiting those ideas, but it's variations, whether I have this sort of Asian, I hesitate to say Chinese, it's not authentic, it's Oriental, vaguely so, from a parallel universe, right? And I have these other parts, but they're all kind of glued together and thinking, well, you're going to pound out one sheet after another. And at that part, that's how I felt when I was doing the 17, that I'm traveling very fast, there's not much time left, I have to make this deadline, but hey, I got it done. Now, just like these genres, you can combine different things that you love that aren't historically there together. In this, I love this blog. It's called Cat Synth, and there are a lot of, apparently, the Venn diagram, the overlap between people who love cats and people who love synthesizers. I've had a couple of submissions to them over the years, and in this one, this Paul Gaze track, I called it that because I was thinking very much, yes, My Bloody Valentine and others. I was thinking also about my cats, my two beautiful cats. Sushi, he's a big black chubby dude, and Uni, she's a tabby, very precocious, and she's been spending a lot of studio time in here. And her mother, my wife, interprets their voices. She does a low Sushi voice, oh there, and Uni, oh, and she is the cat whisperer, and she brings that. I love that. I love having that part of our daily life. Now, I sampled them. I sampled their purrs, the bass purrs and ran them through guitar amps, sampled their meows and their other sorts of noises they lay into bed. One very nice thing about Sushi, he's very, very consistent about headbutts. Unless he's super tired, when I put my fist there, he comes up and bumps my fist. And he will like to, another thing he'll like to do is take a shit on the floor, unfortunately. And so I clean up very quickly after that. It's like, dude, you missed the litter box again, but I'm going to care about you because I love you, man. You're my cat son. And that's what parents do for their children. And so I was thinking, in creating genres, that's what sometimes we do, taking care of the messes that are left behind. And maybe I was reading into that too deeply, but I thought about the next, sort of in a Buckminster Fuller way, this may be Spaceship Earth, but if we are to colonize other planets and our children, what if they had to make a generational trip to Mars? And so there's that sort of cosmic spatial atmosphere in the future of Could we take our pets with us? Could we extend, if we're extending the lives of humans, if we were to extend our companions' lives, clone them? I know it's a thought that's come to a lot of pet owners, pet companions. And so it's very, very meaningful in that regards, that sort of continuation of love. And so in sequencing this album, I thought about the tempos involved and the sort of moods. And we're at an ambient part now. Here we have Ember Awakening, and my brother Zephos, he recognizes the name. It's a reference to an older track, although I don't use the melody, where it's Amber Awakening. Amber is, by the way, one of my favorite colors, along with pink and green. Sometimes it shows up as sort of more yellow as a tertiary thing, but amber monitors, CRT monitors. And so the genre here, I call this Orchestral. I think about the transients. If we want to make something like a Stradivarius violin last, there is beauty in those aged environments. And although it was interesting to see a fairly recent scientific test where the alleged classical musicians couldn't actually tell the difference, in large part between that and a more modern violin. So some of it with the story of an object. It's not the object itself, it's what it's been through that led to the patina, the textures, the dirt, the marks on it. So it's those imperfections that create value in a way, the collectibles. Just like we think of a Roland Acid TB303, and those at one point were thought of as, well, you can't really simulate a real bass player, just throw it away. But later the rise of acid house drives up demand, and therein is a financial link to the stock market. So these sorts of themes, they interplay in my work. And so with Orchestra, I thought this genre would encompass works that you're playing as the instruments are destroyed, and perhaps by the end of the work, the instruments are gone as well. But you've recorded, thanks to digital technology, you've captured that performance. And that's what I thought, where it's curious where we have imperfect. This is a quote I'll say, that when we surpass limitations, we seek to recreate them. And this is something that I've shared a lot with my lovely wife, Ravenelle, that she loves collecting these treasures. And they are limited in many ways. Sometimes they have chips, sometimes they have marks, like I was saying. But you love them. You love the story that has attachment to them. She was showing me, she brought home a door one time, a detached door. It could not yet be activated, like one of those Stephen King doors between to get into thingies or whatever. But, or a quantum leap sort of time traveling device. But it had a very interesting wear and tear to it. So I like vinyl crackles. I like digital hiss. I like putting that on certain parts of the track and taking it away. But for this one in particular, I thought about, well, it's going to burn up the track. It's going to burn up the instruments, including a real burning piano sampled by Diego Stocco and friends for Spectrasonics Omnisphere. It's a great instrument, and I'm just going to engulf it in the sounds of flames. I'm going to degrade it from the grandeur of an orchestra into a very, very lyrical solo piano, and then it's going to fade out into a night campfire, and it'll be beautiful that way. Glitch piano is a genre I do not claim to have invented. It was born on the backs of some of my heroes, in fact, and I did an album in 2011, Glitch Piano, 50 tracks, aptly titled. I thought, hey, I sort of like titling things after genres sometimes, so did it with that, and it's a sort of it's a world that I like to revisit every now and then. My original story concerned the alien invasion of these sentient musical instruments that were sick and disgusted of having humans play them. So they overthrew them and their manipulation and went on to enslave and torture humans. So this dark subversion, I suppose, of my youth when classical pianists and other virtuosos, you're a slave to practice so many hours a day, also found in other sorts of fields like gymnastics. You become your body is exhausted and you're resting on the mat, and then your Romanian coach coming to beat you. I mean, this is just really, really unsettling. But in this piece, of course, I'm not going to say, because I'd like you to make up your mind on this, what piano piece this was inspired by originally. But imagine, if you will, as Rod Serling was known to quote, although I think he was not actually ever found saying that in Twilight Zone. I think in one episode of Night Gallery, I'm not sure of that, but I love Rod Serling as well. This is where I explore further glitch piano. You take the central core of a piano solo. In itself, the performance goes off in some bizarre and dissonant direction, some unexpected chords, and around it I wrap the spice of different DSP treatments, sort of stuttering, sort of glitching and gating, from ill-formed glitch to isotope stutter edit to buff eater from Twisted Tools, and some of the audio damage stuff, to name some names of these beautiful, beautiful creations. And my relation with toolmakers has always been one where I aspire to think about, well, I want to share not just how I use this, but I like knowing the person who made it, what inspired them to do that themselves, and really, really recognize whether it's me before playing presets and saying, I love the work of these sound designers, to, in this case, this is sound design through effects plugins. So yet even more glitch piano. Lastly, we end with an opening of sorts. Now, tunebient. I was thinking in some ways, of course, Brian Eno, ambient music. I was also thinking about how music can come from everywhere. That's a theme that I've seen in Isotope Iris, the synthesizer. That's a thing I've really much learned from Diego Stocco's videos. Found sound and music concrete. A lot of these sort of things where, in this specific instance, I thought about if I were to take what if an orchestra was tuning up and that itself was turned into a composition. Because you don't traditionally think of that's the performance, but I suppose in a John Cage way, where the sounds, well, in this case of the performer, just sitting and playing and then turning sheets of manuscript paper, people in the audience coughing, that becomes part of the music. And I thought it would be a sweet sort of circular aspect if we start on that materialist Casinoclash note and we end on a similar note, in the sense that you think of orchestras and the funding they require. And it's a difficult conversation to have, because on one hand, you have certain classical purists who don't want to accommodate new audiences. So they bitch and moan about not being able to pay their bills that way. Well, music has to serve the audience so often, and if you want to do it for a living. Otherwise, you can do it for yourself, but don't expect to be paid. Don't expect to be compensated aside from your own satisfaction of creating. I forget what the word there. There's some not autodidact, but there's some sort of thing from, was it Mihail Csikszentmihalyi, the guy who did Flow. Anyway, what I was thinking here is, so you have that music that if someone is paying for tickets to the performance, well, what if you could have a whole tunebient concert of just the orchestra tuning that way? And I think that's something I would like to see for live, not just synthesized through my effects processors and machinery. But I think about my own youth, because I grew up on classical piano, and I thought about those conflicts of the times. And I thought about one reason why I moved away, and hence things like glitch piano, where I combine tradition with technology, is because I love seeing those worlds bridged. It's a big part of my passion with genres of, we're not just going to combine the most unlikely things ad hoc, but there is a real passion to see these things put together and done really well. And I think if I'm going to continue to revisit some of these, of course, I already did that with Tiki Punk, with glitch piano, and some of the others, they touch on themes that keep coming up to me. So in closing, I have to make an artist statement. I love that I've had the opportunity to do this, and that Samplephonics, they raised the flag on this. Whether or not it's a contest, it was really the sort of beacon where I wanted to challenge myself to get it done in time. I wanted to create a lot of music amidst creating other music that I'm doing for myself and to share eventually in good time. And I wanted to put together this album. And the reason why it's titled Sound Story Selection in the way it is, in all caps, by the way, and sometimes you see it in square brackets, is because a conversation I had with Brother Zephos, that I thought about a lot of these Japanese albums where sometimes you have all the songs in Japanese, one of them is in English, and it will be titled like that. And it will have some lyrics in English for one reason or another, perhaps cultural fascination, perhaps it's just damn catchy. And so I thought about the genres as being both sort of a foreign thing, but if you like something and you ask someone who knows more, what's this called? Where can I find more artists like this? And it makes me think back to old record stores, think back to friends and referrals. I mean, now we have Facebook shares, we have Spotify stations, things like that, peer-to-peer, where you get recommendations from word of mouth. But I'm thinking back to when the world wasn't so traveled and connected that way, and when there was perhaps more of a mystery behind the music, when there was white label, or people, they admired the big vinyl format art, and all these things of why I make music in the first place, and why I love making the specific music in general that I do. So I think that that's why I did it. And I would like to, in closing, some more thank you for, if you're still here and listening, for checking this out. And by all means, go ahead and listen to the album. And I would like to dedicate and thank my lovely wife, Ravenelle, for being through this and a lot of the process that I just cook out of my head, and I grumble, I mumble, I stumble, and I ramble and tell her about, this is what my day was going with this music, this is what I'm working on now, and she catches like these little bits and pieces, and she's been there to nourish me. I have delicious food and give me hugs. She gave me a hug at the end of this, and that really meant a lot to me. So, honey, I love you, and you're out right now, but when you come home, I'm giving you a super big hug. And I did it. Sound Story Selection, 17 genres.